welcome to our channel. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. The arrivals hall buzzed with its usual chaos, echoing announcements, the squeal of suitcase wheels, and the hum of travelers hurrying in every direction. After 12 exhausting hours in the air, Anabel Mason felt as though her body was still floating above the Atlantic. She tugged her cardigan closer around her shoulders, yawning as she weaved her way toward the baggage claim carousel. Her eyes stung from lack of sleep, but she forced herself to stay alert. She couldn't afford to lose anything, not now. This trip was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to prove herself at her new job in London. The last thing she needed was airport trouble. The carousel lurched to life with a mechanical groan, spitting out a stream of suitcases. Anabel adjusted her tote bag, scanning the passing luggage. Black, navy, black again. Why did everyone in the world own the same boring suitcase? Then she spotted it, black leather with a silver clasp, a red ribbon tied neatly on the handle. Exactly like hers. With a sigh of relief, she stepped forward, gripped the handle, and hauled it off the carousel. Heavy but manageable. She didn't notice the faint cologne clinging to the leather, or the initials embossed subtly on the tag. To her, it was just her bag, her belongings, her life neatly packed inside. She didn't think twice. By the time she pushed through the sliding glass doors into the crisp night air, a drizzle had started. The rain misted against her skin as she called a cab, climbing inside and sinking against the seat. The suitcase rested by her legs, silent and unassuming, holding secrets she hadn't meant to carry. At the same time, Alexander Knight strode into the baggage hall from the VIP exit, his tall frame commanding attention without effort. He had just flown back from New York after a grueling week of negotiations, and though his tailored coat and confident stride revealed little, fatigue pressed against him like a shadow. He glanced around the carousel, his sharp gaze picking out details quickly: businessmen collecting their carry-ons, families juggling strollers, tourists snapping photos. None of them mattered. He was focused on one thing, his suitcase. When a sleek black case with a red ribbon slid toward him, he reached for it. But as he bent to pull it off the belt, his hand brushed against nothing but air. It was gone. Someone had already taken it. His brows furrowed. Impossible. He rarely let details slip past him. He scanned the crowd, searching for whoever had walked away with his things. But the baggage hall was thinning out, and he saw no trace of the suitcase or the thief. He let out a breath, irritation flickering across his otherwise composed face. It wasn't just clothing inside, though those suits had been custom-tailored. No, what unsettled him was the envelope tucked into the inside pocket. The kind of envelope that didn't belong in anyone else's hands. Still, as he turned away from the carousel, something stopped him. His senses caught a lingering fragrance in the air. Soft, warm, unmistakable. Perfume. Not just any perfume, the same one he had encountered years ago. One fleeting night at a charity gala, a stranger had brushed past him in a crowded room, her laughter catching in the air, her perfume curling around him like silk. He hadn't known her name, but the scent had burned itself into his memory. And now, standing in an airport baggage hall, he smelled it again. His pulse shifted, sharp and certain. Whoever had taken his suitcase wasn't just any traveler. Fate had a strange way of working, and Alexander Knight never ignored signs when they appeared. Meanwhile, in the back of the taxi, Anabel leaned her head against the window, fighting sleep as the city lights blurred past. Her thoughts drifted to the week ahead, her new office, her tiny flat waiting in South London, the fear and excitement tangled in her chest. She didn't even glance at the suitcase when the driver helped her carry it into the apartment building. She was too tired, too sure it was hers. She simply thanked him, dragged it up the narrow staircase and set it down by the door. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she'd unpack, settle in, and breathe again. For now, she kicked off her shoes, curled beneath her blanket, and drifted into dreams, completely unaware that she had carried a billionaire's life into her new beginning. And across the city, Alexander made a quiet vow. He would find her. Not only because of what was in the suitcase, but because fate had just dropped the scent of a memory back into his world. Alexander Knight had learned early in life that memory was both a gift and a burden. For him, it had always been sharp, unforgiving, refusing to let go of details others might easily forget. That was why the perfume unsettled him so much. He sat in the back of his town car, the London rain streaking against the tinted windows, while his assistant rattled off updates about meetings and investors. Alexander barely listened. His mind was caught on a thread of memory, woven from scent and chance. Amber and rose, with a trace of something warm and vanilla at the end, that was the perfume. Delicate but bold, the kind that lingered on silk scarves and in the air long after its wearer had left. He'd first encountered it 3 years ago at a charity gala hosted at a French vineyard. She hadn't been on the guest list. He'd noticed her the moment she slipped in, quiet, graceful, with wide, curious eyes that didn't belong in a room full of power-hungry tycoons. Their conversation had lasted only a few minutes. A mix-up at the silent auction table had put them side by side, and she had laughed when she accidentally outbid him for a painting neither of them really wanted. That laugh, that perfume, it had clung to him all night. And then she had disappeared before he could ask her name. Now, years later, the same fragrance drifted from the leather of his missing suitcase. That couldn't be coincidence. Fate had returned her to him in the strangest of ways. Mr. Knight. His assistant's voice finally broke through. Should we still head straight to the office? Or back to the penthouse first? Alexander's gaze dropped to the empty space beside him where his suitcase should have been. For a man like him, luggage wasn't just clothing. Documents were inside, confidential files about an upcoming acquisition, a fountain pen that had signed billion-dollar deals, and that envelope he couldn't let anyone else see. But strangely, the weight of those things didn't worry him as much as it should. The thought of the woman, of finding her again, pulled stronger. No office, he said at last. His voice was calm, clipped, the kind that brokered no argument. I need the airline to trace my bag immediately. Yes, sir. The assistant already had his phone out, murmuring into the line. Alexander leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The scent still lingered faintly, teasing him as if she were sitting just out of reach. He intended to reach her. Across the city, Anabel stirred awake as dawn filtered through the curtains of her modest flat. She stretched, bones still heavy with travel fatigue, and padded into the kitchen for a cup of tea. The suitcase sat in the corner, silent and unremarkable. She eyed it over the rim of her mug. She should unpack before heading out. Her new job started tomorrow, no excuse to be unprepared. Setting the tea aside, she crouched beside the bag and unzipped it. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Not hers, she was certain. This was something cleaner, sharper, with hints of expensive cologne. Frowning, she pulled the zipper open wider. Her heart gave a lurch. Inside was not her neatly folded dresses and shoes. Instead, fine Italian suits, pressed to perfection, stared back at her. Silk ties in muted tones. Leather shoes polished so well they almost reflected her face. What on earth? She dug deeper, panic rising. This wasn't her bag. Her hands brushed against a heavy monogrammed notebook with the initials AK embossed in gold. Beneath it, a sleek folder filled with contracts and numbers she couldn't make sense of. Everything smelled faintly of luxury, of a life far removed from hers. Anabel dropped back onto her heels, covering her mouth with her hands. Somewhere out there, someone had her suitcase, the one with her clothes, her journals, and worst of all, her grandmother's scarf. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. She scrambled for her phone, searching for the airline's helpline. The hold music seemed endless, drilling into her ears. By the time someone answered, her nerves were frayed. Yes, hello, I picked up the wrong suitcase yesterday, she explained quickly. Black leather, red ribbon on the handle. But it's not mine. I need to return it. Can you contact the other passenger? The agent promised to file a report, though their tone suggested it could take time. Anabel groaned, rubbing her forehead. She didn't have time. She needed her belongings before work tomorrow. And besides, whoever this AK was, he probably wanted his bag back as much as she did. That same morning, Alexander sat in his office, though he barely touched the papers on his desk. His assistant had confirmed the airline's update. The other passenger had already called about the mix-up. She was in the city. Relief sparked in his chest, mingled with something sharper. Excitement? Anticipation? He didn't allow himself those luxuries often. He rose, straightening his suit jacket. Set a meeting, he ordered quietly. Arrange for the exchange. Yes, sir. Should I request she come here? Alexander shook his head, a rare curve at the corner of his mouth. No. I'll go to her. Because this wasn't just about a suitcase anymore. It was about the woman with the perfume he could never forget. Anabel double-checked the address she had scribbled down from the airline's email. The representative had assured her the other passenger would meet her to exchange the suitcases. Even so, her stomach knotted as she climbed the marble steps of the hotel. This was no ordinary hotel. Its glass facade gleamed against the morning light, and uniformed staff ushered sleek cars to the entrance. She felt absurdly out of place in her sensible flats and raincoat. She hugged her tote bag closer, trying not to stare at the polished chandelier that glittered through the lobby doors. "Just return the suitcase, Anabel," she whispered to herself. "Get your things back. Then breathe again." Dragging the black leather case behind her, she stepped into the lobby. Every surface gleamed, from the marble floors to the gold accents along the reception desk. She half expected someone to stop her, to tell her she didn't belong here. Instead, a young woman in a tailored uniform greeted her with a polite smile. "Miss Mason? Right this way, please. Mr. Knight is expecting you." Mr. Knight. The name rang with quiet power. Her nerves spiked. Who exactly had she stumbled into by taking the wrong bag? The attendant led her across the lobby to a private lounge where a tall figure stood near the window. He turned as she entered, and for a moment, her breath caught. He was striking, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, with sharp cheekbones that could have been carved from marble. His presence filled the room, not loud or imposing but undeniable like gravity. But it wasn't just his appearance that made her pause. It was the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew her. "Miss Mason," he said, his voice smooth, resonant, as if he had rehearsed her name 100 times in his mind. "Thank you for bringing my suitcase." She blinked, recovering her composure. "Well, it was hardly intentional. I'm the one who should apologize. I didn't realize until I opened it this morning." A faint smile curved his lips. "I should thank you then. It seems fate has an unusual sense of humor." She frowned slightly, puzzled by the remark. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped closer, his gaze steady on hers. "You may not remember me," he said, "but we've met before." Her brows knitted. "Met before?" She searched his face, trying to place him. Nothing came immediately, until he added, softly, "France. A vineyard gala. You outbid me on a painting." The memory struck like a bell in her mind. A warm evening, the air thick with laughter and music. A table lined with auction sheets. She had accidentally written her bid on the wrong line, much to the amusement of the tall man beside her. She had laughed nervously, brushed it off, and disappeared before the evening ended. Her eyes widened. "That was you." He nodded once, a glimmer of something, relief, in his expression. "I never forgot." Heat crept into her cheeks. It had been such a brief encounter. She had assumed he wouldn't remember her at all. And yet here he was, standing before her, treating that fleeting moment as though it mattered. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "thank you for being forgiving about the suitcase. I was worried you'd be furious." "I was concerned," he admitted. "There were things inside I'd rather not lose." "But angry? No. Not when it led me back to you." His words left her momentarily speechless. Who even said things like that? To cover her fluster, she nudged the suitcase toward him. "Here it is. Untouched, I promise. Now if I could just have mine back." He gestured to the leather case at his side. "Of course. I had it brought down for you." Their hands brushed as they exchanged luggage. A spark shot up her arm, unexpected and unsettling. She withdrew quickly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, Mr. Knight," she said, clutching her bag. "Alexander," he corrected smoothly. "Please call me Alexander." She hesitated. It felt too familiar, too dangerous. "Right. Well, Alexander. I should go. I start work tomorrow and I need to prepare." His gaze lingered on her, unreadable, as though weighing whether to let her walk away. At last he inclined his head. "Of course. But Miss Mason, I would like to see you again." Her heart skipped. "See me again? Why?" The corner of his mouth lifted. "Because fate clearly doesn't like leaving things unfinished." She laughed nervously, backing toward the door. "I think fate's done enough already." But even as she left the lounge, suitcase in hand, she couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes following her, or the echo of his words. Alexander remained by the window long after she disappeared from sight. The city sprawled beyond the glass, but his thoughts were only of her. The perfume still lingered in the air, and with it, a certainty he rarely felt. Their paths had crossed once by chance. Now he would make certain it wasn't the last. Anabel didn't breathe easily until she stepped outside the hotel. The morning air was cool, damp with lingering drizzle, but it felt easier than the rarefied air of the lounge. She tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, trying to steady her nerves. Alexander Knight. Even the name sounded like it belonged in a glossy magazine, one of those profiles about untouchable men who ran empires while ordinary people like her scrambled to make rent. He wasn't supposed to remember her, yet he had. He wasn't supposed to say things like, "Fate doesn't like leaving things unfinished." And worse, her heart wasn't supposed to react the way it had. By the time she reached her flat, Anabel had convinced herself it was nothing. A strange, fleeting encounter, nothing more. Tomorrow she would be at her new job, focused on her new life. Alexander Knight belonged to another world entirely. But fate, it seemed, was not done weaving. Alexander didn't wait long before testing that promise he'd made to himself. By afternoon, his assistant had prepared a slim file with everything public about Anabel Mason. Graduate in literature. Worked 2 years as a marketing assistant. Recently hired at a publishing firm in London. No significant scandals, debts, or shadows in her past. Ordinary, some might have said. But to him she was the opposite. He closed the file and stood restless. For all his resources, all his power, he didn't want her life reduced to a dossier. He wanted the real thing, the way she laughed nervously, the way her eyes flickered when she remembered him. So when his driver asked for the next destination, Alexander gave the address of a quiet cafe near her neighborhood. He had no plan beyond proximity. He wanted to see if fate would nudge her into his path again. Anabel wasn't surprised when her best friend, Lucy, insisted on taking her out for coffee to celebrate her new chapter. She needed the distraction anyway, a way to shake off the surreal morning. The cafe was small, tucked onto a street corner with ivy climbing the brick walls. She loved it instantly. Warm light spilled through the windows, and the smell of roasted beans wrapped around her like a hug. They chose a table near the back. Lucy was mid-story about her disastrous date the night before when Anabel's gaze drifted to the door and froze. Alexander Knight had just stepped in. For one wild moment she thought she was hallucinating. But no, there he was, exchanging polite words with the barista, his tall frame and expensive coat standing out among the cozy chatter of students and locals. Her pulse stumbled. "Oh no," she whispered. Lucy followed her gaze, eyebrows shooting up. "Oh no?" More like "oh wow." "Who is that?" "Nobody," Anabel said quickly, heat rushing to her cheeks. "Just someone I accidentally met earlier. I swear I didn't know he'd be here." As if sensing her eyes on him, Alexander looked across the room. Their gazes collided, and that faint smile touched his mouth again, the kind that made her insides twist. He walked over. "Miss Mason," he greeted, voice as calm as if they'd arranged this meeting. "What a coincidence." Lucy gaped. "You know him?" Anabel sighed. "Long story." Alexander extended a hand politely toward Lucy. "Alexander Knight." Lucy shook it, still wide-eyed. "As in the Alexander Knight?" Anabel wanted to sink through the floor. She shot her friend a warning look, but Alexander only seemed amused. He pulled a chair closer. "May I join you?" It wasn't really a question. Anabel crossed her arms, leaning back. "You just happened to wander into this cafe?" "Perhaps," he said smoothly. "Or perhaps fate is more insistent than either of us expected." Lucy looked between them, her grin growing by the second. "I'm suddenly very glad I insisted on coffee." Anabel resisted the urge to kick her under the table. "Mr. Knight, I appreciate your persistence. But I really think the suitcase business is over. You got yours back, I got mine, end of story." "Stories," Alexander said softly, "rarely end when we want them to." Her throat tightened. He spoke as if he knew something she didn't, as if the universe had whispered to him and left her in the dark. She didn't know whether to be intrigued or infuriated. He shifted slightly, lowering his voice. "I meant what I said earlier. I never forgot you, Anabel. Not the gala, not the perfume. I searched for you once. But you had vanished before I even knew your name." Her heart thudded. She hadn't realized her silly mistake at that auction had left an imprint on anyone, let alone him. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why remember me?" His gaze was steady, earnest. Because some things don't fade. Some things are meant to return. For a long moment, the cafe noise faded around them. She felt Lucy's curious stare, felt her own pulse drumming. And though every rational part of her screamed that she should walk away from this man, Anabel couldn't deny the truth. Something in her wanted to see where fate was leading. The office smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. Anabel straightened the stack of papers on her desk, reminding herself not to fidget. First days were always nerve-wracking, but this one mattered more than most. After months of uncertainty, she finally had a stable job at a publishing house. A chance to prove herself. She had barely booted her computer when her manager, Mrs. Porter, appeared with her brisk smile. "Mason, we're meeting an important client this afternoon. I'd like you to sit in, take notes, and get a sense of how we handle these negotiations." "Of course," Anabel said, eager though nerves twisted in her stomach. Mrs. Porter's tone carried the weight of caution. "This client is one of our biggest investors. Everything must go smoothly." Anabel nodded, hiding her unease. Who could possibly be so important? She didn't have to wait long for the answer. By mid-afternoon, she followed her manager into the conference room. The moment the tall man in a tailored navy suit turned from the window, her breath caught. Alexander Knight. Her heart sank and skipped at the same time. Of all the people in the world, why him again? He smiled faintly when their eyes met, as if he had expected this. "Miss Mason," he murmured in greeting, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "It seems fate enjoys its sense of humor." Her cheeks warmed. She quickly averted her gaze, sliding into a chair beside her manager. "Mr. Knight," she whispered back, "are you stalking me?" "Not at all," he said lightly, settling across from her. "Though I wouldn't call it unfortunate if I were." The meeting began, though Anabel barely heard the business jargon. Mrs. Porter discussed marketing strategies while Alexander's eyes found her every so often, lingering just long enough to make her pulse stutter. Each time she ducked her head, furious at herself for reacting. When the meeting adjourned, Mrs. Porter was practically glowing with relief. "Thank you for your continued support, Mr. Knight," she said. "We're lucky to have investors who care about literature." Alexander shook her hand politely before glancing at Anabel again. "And I'm fortunate to have familiar faces here." Mrs. Porter raised a brow. "You know one of my staff already?" Anabel nearly choked. "Just by accident. An airport mix-up." Alexander agreed smoothly, his lips twitching as though he found her fluster endearing. "And since then, fate keeps insisting we meet again." Mrs. Porter looked mildly intrigued but said nothing further, ushering him out with professional courtesy. Anabel thought she was safe until she stepped outside for her lunch break, and found Alexander leaning casually near the building's entrance. "You're impossible," she muttered, folding her arms. "Persistent," he corrected, his eyes glinting. "And very curious. Do you always make such an impression on strangers you meet at airports and vineyards?" She rolled her eyes, though her lips twitched despite herself. "I don't usually make a habit of stealing suitcases, if that's what you're implying." He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Shame. It worked out rather well for me." She gave him a pointed look. "You're insufferable." "Only when I'm interested," he countered smoothly. "And I am very interested, Anabel." Her pulse leapt at the sound of her name on his lips. He said it deliberately, savoring the syllables. She quickly turned her gaze away, desperate for composure. "Look, Mr. Knight." "Alexander," he interrupted softly. She hesitated. "Alexander. Whatever this is, it isn't a good idea. You're a client. My boss would have my head if she knew we were even talking like this." His expression softened, though his eyes didn't waver. "I understand. But I won't apologize for wanting to know you. The world is full of people who never leave a mark. And then there are those who do, without even trying." Her breath caught. He had a way of speaking that slid past her defenses, straight into places she wasn't ready to examine. To distract herself, she gestured toward the busy street. "Don't you have a million meetings to attend? Empires to run?" "Perhaps," he said, leaning slightly closer. "But empires feel strangely less important when I'm talking to you." She blinked at him, stunned into silence. Before she could summon a reply, his driver pulled up to the curb. Alexander straightened, smoothing his coat. "I'll let you get back to work, Miss Mason. But somehow, I don't think this is the last time we'll meet." He gave her one last smile, subtle but devastating, and stepped into the car. Anabel stood rooted to the spot long after it disappeared into traffic. Her heart hammered, her mind racing. This was madness. He was a billionaire, a client, a man who should be far beyond her world. And yet she couldn't deny the pull. Anabel told herself she wouldn't think about him. She buried herself in work, threw her energy into reading manuscripts, writing summaries, and learning the publishing house's fast-paced rhythm. Yet every time she tried to concentrate, her thoughts wandered. Alexander Knight. He wasn't supposed to look at her the way he did. He wasn't supposed to speak in a tone that made the air between them feel charged, alive. She barely knew him. And yet, when she lay awake at night, her memory replayed their conversations word by word. It was ridiculous. She needed boundaries. So when Mrs. Porter announced they were hosting an intimate dinner for key investors later that week, Anabel steeled herself. She would be professional, cordial, distant. That resolve lasted all of 5 minutes into the dinner. The restaurant was warm and golden lit, its tables draped in crisp linen. As Anabel poured water for the table, she felt his gaze before she saw him. Alexander sat at the far end, flanked by industry veterans, his suit cut perfectly, his posture relaxed but commanding. And his eyes, directly on her. She ducked her head, cheeks heating, and busied herself with her notepad. But inevitably, throughout the evening, his attention returned to her. Subtle glances. The faintest curve of his mouth when their gazes met. He never spoke out of turn, never drew attention. But she felt it, like a current thrumming beneath the polished conversation. When the dinner ended, she lingered to collect notes, waiting for the last guest to leave. She nearly jumped when a voice murmured at her shoulder. "You did well tonight." Anabel turned, heart pounding. Alexander stood close, the restaurant now half empty around them. "Thank you," she said, trying for composure. "Though I doubt anyone even noticed me." "I did." His voice was quiet, meant only for her. She glanced away, forcing a laugh. "You noticed too much." "Not nearly enough," he countered, eyes glinting. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. Finally, she cleared her throat. "You shouldn't be saying things like that. Not here. Not when my boss." "She isn't here now," he interrupted gently. That simple truth left her speechless. He took a small step closer, not crowding her but close enough that she caught the faint trace of his cologne. "Anabel, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. But I also don't want to pretend I feel nothing. Because that would be a lie." Her heart thudded. "You barely know me." His gaze softened. "I knew enough the first time I saw you." She froze. "The gala?" "Yes." His voice dropped lower, carrying the weight of memory. "Do you remember? You laughed at me. Not because you wanted to impress anyone, not because you were playing some game, but because you found the situation genuinely absurd. Everyone else that night wore masks and then you appeared. Real. Unapologetic. I couldn't forget." Anabel swallowed hard. She remembered that night. She had felt out of place, surrounded by wealth and power she didn't belong to. Yet for a few minutes, standing beside him at that auction table, she had felt seen. "You're exaggerating," she whispered. "I don't exaggerate," Alexander said simply. Her breath caught. He meant it. Every word. She shook her head, struggling to gather her defenses. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. You're you, and I'm me. We live in different worlds." His lips curved faintly. "Worlds aren't so different when two people choose to step across the line." The words hung between them, dangerous and tempting. For a moment, Anabel almost let herself believe. Almost let herself fall. But then her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the spell. She stepped back, fumbling for it. "It's late," she said quickly. "I should go." His eyes lingered on her, searching, but he didn't press. Instead, he inclined his head with quiet restraint. "I'll walk you out." Outside, the night was cool, the city alive with passing cars and distant laughter. They walked side by side toward the curb where a taxi waited. Neither spoke, but the silence was thick, charged. At the car door, she turned to him, determined to draw a line. "Thank you, Mr. Knight." "Alexander," he reminded softly, his eyes catching hers. Her throat tightened. "Alexander. Thank you, for tonight. But this, whatever it is, it can't happen." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, with a faint smile, he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against her sleeve. Not a touch meant to trap, only to linger. Perhaps, he murmured. But I've learned that the things we tell ourselves can't happen, often do. Her heart hammered as she slipped into the taxi. Through the window, she saw him still standing there, watching as the car pulled away, his expression calm but determined. Anabel leaned back against the seat, her chest tight. She had drawn her boundary. She had made it clear. So why did it feel as though, with every step, she was being pulled closer to him anyway? Anabel stood at her window, the city lights glowing like scattered stars below. She had spent days convincing herself to keep her distance. She repeated the reasons like a mantra. He was a billionaire, she was an ordinary woman. He was her company's investor, she was barely holding her first job. They had no business tangling their lives together. And yet, every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice. Some things don't fade. Some things are meant to return. A knock startled her. She hesitated, heart racing. She hadn't been expecting anyone. When she opened the door, Alexander stood there. Tall, composed, but with something unguarded in his eyes. Rain clung to the shoulders of his coat, droplets sliding down like diamonds. "I shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "But I couldn't stay away." Anabel's pulse stuttered. "Alexander, what are you doing?" He stepped inside when she didn't stop him, setting the boundary with her silence. He took off his coat, his movements deliberate, controlled, but his eyes never left hers. "I've spent years building walls," he admitted. "Walls of steel and glass, of power and control. I thought that's what I needed, to protect myself, to never be at anyone's mercy. And for the most part it worked. People come close but they don't touch anything real. Not in here." He touched his chest lightly. Her breath caught. She had never imagined him admitting weakness. "And then you," he continued, his voice softening. "A stranger at a gala, laughing at an auction mistake. A woman I should have forgotten within hours. But I didn't. I couldn't. Your perfume lingered in my memory like a ghost. Do you know what that means? That every time I passed someone wearing it, I turned, hoping, foolishly, that it would be you." Anabel's throat tightened. She pressed a hand to her chest as if to steady herself. "And then, fate gave me a suitcase that wasn't mine." His lips curved faintly, though his eyes shone with raw honesty. "I opened it and there it was again, your scent. The reminder I had never stopped searching, even when I told myself I wasn't." She swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. "Alexander." He stepped closer, his voice steady but low, as if afraid to break the fragile truth hanging between them. "I don't care about the rules of your company, or what people would say about us. I care that when I'm near you, the walls I've lived behind don't feel necessary anymore. You undo me, Anabel. And I don't want to fight it." Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She felt the weight of his words, the depth of them. This wasn't charm or calculated flirtation. This was him unmasked. Her instincts screamed to be cautious, to guard herself. But another part, quieter, truer, rose up and drowned out the fear. Because she realized in that moment that she had already fallen. The signs had been there all along. The way her pulse tripped when he looked at her. The way her thoughts wandered to him when she should have been focused on anything else. The way his words, simple, honest, slipped under her skin. She had fallen, piece by piece, moment by moment, until she stood here now, her heart wide open. "Do you know what terrifies me most?" she whispered. He shook his head gently. "That I've tried so hard to keep my life simple. Say, predictable. And then you arrive, impossible, extraordinary, and I realize I don't want safe anymore. I want this, whatever this is, even if it breaks me." His eyes softened, and for the first time she saw the weight he carried lift just a little. "Then let it be this," he said quietly. He reached for her hand, slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers curled into his, fitting as though they had always belonged there. The silence swelled, charged with something bigger than both of them. She searched his face, saw the sincerity in every line, and felt her last defenses crumble. Her lips curved, trembling but certain. "Alexander Knight, you're impossible. And yet," he murmured, leaning closer, "you're still here." Her laugh caught in her throat as his forehead touched hers, tender, reverent. His confession had torn down walls, but it was her own admission, the truth she had buried, that sealed the space between them. When his lips finally brushed hers, it wasn't a billionaire kissing a woman who had stumbled into his world. It was a man and a woman who had waited years, without even realizing it, for fate to thread them together again. And for the first time, Anabel didn't resist. She fell. 3 months later, Anabel walked through the same airport where it all began. The polished floor gleamed, voices echoed overhead, and travelers hurried with their luggage. This time though, she wasn't rushing. Beside her, Alexander carried her bag with ease, his other hand linked firmly with hers. His presence turned the crowded space into something calm, as if the world shrank whenever he was near. "You realize," he said with a playful glance, "I still don't trust you near a baggage carousel." Anabel laughed, nudging his arm. "You should be grateful. If I hadn't been careless, you'd still be hoarding walls instead of hearts." "Your heart, to be precise," he murmured, pressing a quick kiss to her temple. Heat bloomed in her cheeks, but she didn't hide it. She had spent weeks learning to stand in this love, to believe it was hers as much as his. What had started with a mix-up was no mistake, it was the universe's gentle push. As they passed a cluster of travelers, Anabel noticed one of them struggling with a heavy suitcase. She paused instinctively, stepping in to help, and Alexander chuckled. "There you go again. Always reaching for what isn't yours." She shot him a teasing look. "Worked out well last time, didn't it?" His smile softened, his eyes warming as he tugged her closer. "Better than I ever imagined." They continued toward their gate, fingers entwined, hearts light. The airport was just another stop now, not a place of chaos or chance, but the reminder of where destiny had finally caught up with them. And somewhere deep inside, Anabel knew that in the grand baggage claim of life, she had chosen right this time. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and join us for more stories that prove compassion can change the world.